Hello everyone, welcome to the Jacksonville History Show, brought to you by the Jacksonville Historical Society and Comcast. I'm Harry Reagan, President of the Historical Society. Our show is here every Wednesday night at 8. Tonight we celebrate the 90th anniversary of the Jacksonville Zoo. With us are our guests, John Haight, Chairman of the Board, Carl Krantz, Director of Biological Programs, and Dennis Pate, Executive Director. Welcome all of you to the History Show.
Nice of you to have us.
Thank you.
Well, it's amazing, the 90th anniversary that you celebrated last year. Dennis, we want to go through some photos, starting as early as we possibly can. Let's go ahead and take a look at one of the very first photos that is available. The zoo started out in Springfield.
It did. It was right close to downtown, and 90 years ago in 1914 is where it started. It was near 3rd Street, right near an existing park, I think. And it started, I think, with the way most zoos started, with a pretty modest collection of animals. And as far as zoos go, 90-year history is a pretty long one in this country.
Now, what are we seeing here?
This is
Some
an
deer.
An old photograph of some deer. You can see the old typical sort of fencing that was available at the time. These look like probably white-tailed deer from Florida. An old night quarters there, and just a very basic enclosure.
That was 1914, and you can go ahead and show us some more photos as we go along. John Haight, you have been involved with the zoo for a long time as a visitor and now as a member of the board and chairman of the board.
Well, I've served on the board now for about 9 years. I've found it very interesting, very enlightening. We've had lots of challenges. I have been the chairman of the board for the last year and the current year. I've been a resident of Jacksonville since 1968, when our young ones were so tall, and we of course took them to the zoo on a number of occasions, but the zoo was much different then than it is today.
And anyone who hasn't been to the zoo in a year, or maybe as much as 5 years, just doesn't know what he or she is missing.
There have been major changes take place at the zoo, all for the better. It was not too many years ago that I would consider the zoo to have been almost an embarrassment. That is not the case today. Today, the Jacksonville Zoo is being raved about throughout the zoo community in the United States.
And it has become a real tourist attraction.
Very much so. And I have told many people that within the next 5 years, we hope it's one of the primary attractions between Washington, D.C. and Orlando, Florida.
Carl, one of the things that has happened in the philosophy of zoos is a more enlightened method of displaying animals, better for the visitor because you get a better look at the animals, and certainly better for the animals.
Right. The traditional approach was your bars and heavy caging and not much emphasis on the natural environment. And the exhibits we're building today, such as the one that we opened last year, Range of the Jaguar, has much more emphasis on natural environment. We've even worked in some archaeological, historical aspects. And we've done a lot to make the barriers appear to go away and blur from where the guest area starts and ends and where the animal area ends.
Well, one of the interesting things that I discovered in looking at the history of the Jacksonville Zoo was there was a period of time when the zoo was kind of a drive-through zoo. You could actually stay in your car, drive past the animal exhibits.
It was built on the old sort of Main Street design philosophy, where there was actually a main street that went right down the center of the zoo, and you're right, you drove your car right in, you parked it, you end parked it, and there were some parking lots down by the river, and from there you went to the zoo. And that philosophy actually had some merit, and we've come back to a lot of that sort of main path philosophy now. It's a pedestrian path instead of a main path, instead of a street, but there's something to be said for that, and Jacksonville, like many zoos, had that main street. You drove your car, as you said, not unlike many zoos of the era, though.
Well, let's go back and look at some more photos. 1914 was when the zoo started in Springfield, and then they gradually, fairly rapidly, added a number of animals. 1915, they had a black bear added to the collection. But Springfield had a problem. which was still exists sometimes today, flooding
Yes.
in that area. And on the evening of December 23rd, 1916, the Springfield Park Zoo almost disappeared as a result of 3 days of rain and high tides. And I guess the zoo folks decided they'd better start looking elsewhere.
I think that was probably the first major event that made them think this wasn't such a good site.
Well, let's look at some more photos from these early
Well,
years.
this is an interesting one. This is the old elephant building. You can see one of the elephants down in the bottom right-hand corner. And it was an ornate building, sort of a deco building, that was right across from where one of our restaurants are right now.
And a lot of people remember that building because it hasn't been gone that long.
No, it has not been gone that long, and it was done with some sort of Egyptian motif on it. Very minimal quarters inside, probably only enough for one, maybe two elephants, and very small outdoor area. And of course, we've changed that quite a bit now, but pretty typical.
Okay.
Some of the early history of the zoo. I believe this is Chick.
Miss Chick. Yep.
Miss Chick, the elephant named after Chick Acosta.
Miss Chick, right.
Yes, and she spent many, many years at the zoo and was really a crowd pleaser. Here she is again as an adult. You can see it was just sort of a railroad tie barriers attached to concrete, and people could get quite close, sometimes dangerously so, but it made for interesting time.
Okay, let's go ahead and move into the next era here.
Okay. This is a pretty generic photograph. It almost could have been taken in any zoo. It happened to have been taken in Jacksonville, and it just showed some of what looked like hoofstock barns, a typical, almost barracks-like barn, and the animal night quarters and the exhibits were directly connected. Now, of course, we separate those so that we sort of hide some of those behind-the-scenes elements, but very typical for the time, the chain link, and so on. Another typical one, I'm not sure what this one is, but it's another building. Many of these were constructed of wood, and because of that, in our climate, didn't last very long between the termites and the heat and humidity, and so they were far less than permanent buildings.
And I think a little further on here we're going to see what I think was referred to as the grotto, the pits,
Yes.
which really were the pits in a sense of where a lot of the cats were housed.
There is a slide of that. This happens to be a slide of some of the alligators, the really large alligators we have, and this was down, Carl, correct me, down by the river somewhere, where Australia now sits. And a lot of these alligators, many of them we still have today, and they're among the oldest animals in the zoo, and they're quite large, and they're of course in our Wild Florida exhibit. Some picnic areas at the zoo. Again, now we really focus on breeding endangered animals. This one happened to be a cross between a donkey and a zebra that was produced. It's the sort of thing we wouldn't do today because we really want to focus on preserving each individual species and not hybridizing it with other domestic animals. But some of there it is right there, a really unique looking animal with the zebra striped legs.
There's the grotto.
There's the bear grotto you were talking about. Really, a number of these, you know, and the name of the game was how many animals can we have in the zoo? So more focus was paid to really how many different kinds of animals can we have in the zoo, and less attention was really being paid to the quality of the environment the animals were in.
Well, that had to be very bad 6 or 8 months of the year, probably.
It wasn't good. A lot of concrete, and of course the concrete absorbs the heat, and so it was very warm and mostly bears in these sorts of enclosures. Not a whole lot to do in these sorts of enclosures, usually concrete environments for them, and but if you wanted to see a lot of animals, it was easy to see them. The trouble was they weren't that healthy living in there, and sort of psychologically it didn't really benefit them there very much.
Well, we're going to see some more recent photos. I'm going to let you go ahead and locate them, and I'll ask John Haight. I don't want to run out of time before we talk about what's coming ahead. In the very near future, a major giraffe exhibit, right?
Yes.
John, go ahead and
Yes, a
talk
very
about
major change for the giraffes and for the entire giraffe exhibit. In previous years, the giraffe and zebra have been in a confined area. They don't really get along that well together, and we are separating them now. The new giraffe exhibit is some 2.5, almost 3 acres. Currently, we only have 3 giraffe. We are seeking additional ones. We'd like to have, I think it's as many as 6 or 7. and we'll be able to handle and accommodate that size of a giraffe family. In addition to that, there is an elevated outlook, sort of a feeding platform where our guests can go up and actually come face to face with the giraffe and feed them biscuits, which will be available for them. And
Carl, talk a little bit about the program, coordination program with other zoos, breeding programs and swapping animals and so forth. There's a real effort in that regard, right?
We belong to the American Zoo and Aquarium Association, and there are about 220 members across the United States. And everyone, for example, that has giraffes, we work cooperatively together to breed and manage the the different kinds of giraffes that we have. And we have reticulated giraffes, which are the most abundant giraffe in North America.
Which means, I used to know, but reticulated means?
Well, reticulated has to do with their color pattern.
Okay.
It's the square blotches with the white banding around them. And so we work together to manage our giraffe populations.
Well, let's go back and look at some more photos, Dennis. And this is a photo, kind of a milestone in the modern zoo. In this photo is Mayor Ed Austin, and we're talking about the River City Renaissance, which injected a major infusion of city money, matched, by the way, by the Zoological Society.
Yes.
So what happened as a result of that?
Well, I think, and this happened in probably the early 90s, early to mid 90s, and was really the turnaround point for the zoo, where they really reconfigured and set up the master plan for the entire zoo, some of which you see implemented today. This happens to be main camp, the point of entry for visitors, and it was all done in an African-style architecture, and this looks like the grand opening for that with the mayor and the then director, Dale Tuttle.
Mm-hmm.
And a momentous event, and really has become an icon for the entire zoo.
Mm-hmm.
Again, more speeches happening along the way about all of this, and some of the giraffe that we have that John just talked about expanding the exhibit. So one of our elephants, Kimba, in our yard. This is about an acre yard, so they got a much bigger space to live in. A huge pool.
Bigger house than that old house.
Yeah, it's, you know, we went from a house to really with a small backyard, a little postage stamp backyard, to an entire exhibit that's measured in thousands of square feet, and not tens of square feet. Carl's always had nice things to say about this pool.
Well, it's one of the nicest features of the elephant exhibit. It actually mimics a riverbank, and it's got a nice gradual slope, so the elephants can actually choose how deep they want to get into it. They can completely immerse themselves in the pool.
Sometimes you'll just see a little trunk sticking up. So it's awfully nice that the entire elephant can get underwater, and in the summertime they use it quite frequently.
Yeah.
As you can see here, they really enjoy lounging in that. A lot of close-up views. Some of the primates in the African exhibit, and the African exhibit was one of the first ones done, Harry, at the zoo, redone at the zoo, and this included elephants and rhinos. This is a colobus monkey from East Africa. And,
well, I think as a result of the River City Renaissance, apes of the world, the wild Florida, a number of things started happening in that era, right?
That's right. The Africa exhibit was pretty much finished, and as you said, we added wild Florida, the great ape exhibit, where we brought in gorillas and chimps and bonobos, and those were really important additions to the collection at the zoo. It really helped make it more of an international collection, and one that had a lot of public appeal to it.
Well, let's go ahead and look at some more photos here.
There's some of the white rhinos in our plains of East Africa. Very spacious exhibit for them, and we have mixed species. We have rhinos, and we've had a very successful program with white rhinos. We have 6 animals now: kudus, ostrich, and a variety of waterfowl that live in that exhibit. We've had many births that have occurred there, and the youngsters have done really well. Here's another one. We have a male, 2 females, and their kids that now are in the exhibit. One of the vultures, this is a lappet-faced vulture, I think, over by the elephants in an exhibit over there. Of course, a male ostrich. One of the zebras. John mentioned that we currently house the zebras with our giraffe, and they occasionally don't get along, but the zebras can be really hard on the yard, and we're hoping to have a very green yard for the giraffe. And so Carl is bringing in gazelle species that lives in Sudan and northern Kenya called a Soemmerring's gazelle.
So they prefer not to be housed together, but they coexist, so to speak.
They'll get along okay. The zebras are just really hard on the landscape in the exhibit, and so we're moving them to a separate exhibit and moving in gazelles to live with the giraffe. And I think we'll have a much more beautiful exhibit. This is the reticulated giraffe, and you can see this net-like pattern on the giraffe of this particular species. It's considered one of the more beautiful of the subspecies of giraffe. And these guys are the ones getting a new house. That's 6 times larger than their existing one. Flamingos, a lot of the favorites here. This is a male mandrill, one of the more beautiful of the baboon species. The female, we have a nice exhibit over in the great apes for them. Here's another view of the female exhibit, female mandrill.